years in leadership and a dozen years in interpersonal workspace. He's an Executech Senior VP of IT Services. And James combines his love for IT and cybersecurity along with his passion for leadership development. And we're very grateful to you again, like Tony mentioned, you and the entire Executech team hosting today. And we're excited to learn a little more about planning for the worst.
A lot more.
Let's give our warm welcome.
Thank you, David. All right, welcome everyone. So yeah, it sounds a little doom and gloom, but we are talking about how to plan for the worst case scenarios. It is brought to you by the Financial Executive International and Executech. So today's agenda, we're going to cover just different topics. The latest cyber threats, so you know what you're looking for out there, what might be going on. Prevention techniques and perhaps products that we can do to prevent these things from being an issue. Then how to prioritize our security efforts. There's a lot of different things we can do. How do we know what to do first, second, and so on? So we'll be talking about that. And then some planning and responding we do because it might happen to one of us. I hope it never does. I hope it happens to none of us ever again, but it might, and we want to know what to do in that event. So we'll cover that. Got a lot of slides and about 40 minutes, so I'll burn through these pretty quick. I have an introduction already, so we'll skip this one. Thank you for that. I will say, if you guys have questions afterward, by all means, I'm always available. I love to help organizations and individuals secure themselves against the bad guys out there. So feel free to reach out to me, james@executech.com. All right, let's talk about some of the latest cyber threats. This is not a new one. You're all familiar with this one. Credit card theft is a big deal, right? Unfortunately, it's emerged last year as the most common reported type of identity theft out there. Something like almost 500,000 credit cards were stolen last year. It's a really big deal. And according to the Nielsen report, some of you may be familiar with, $165 billion in the next 10 years. So this is a growing industry of bad guys out there who are stealing and reselling credit cards. In fact, one of the big ones, they call these carding sites. These are on the dark web. This one started up a year ago called Biden Cash. You may have seen this in the news. For their annual, these are carding sites. So they collect stolen credit card information and they sell it. That's what they do on the dark web. These obviously are not good guys. For their annual, in order to commemorate their 1 year mark, they released over 2 million credit cards out there just for free. They said, anybody want these? Here's 2 million credit cards you guys can have. They included things like name, email address, phone numbers, and home addresses, just to kind of lure these other bad guys in to buying their product, which of course is credit card numbers, expiration dates, and CVV codes. That's their actual product that they're selling. And these expirations range from this year all the way up to 2052. So your card might already be stolen and you may not know it, and they're just sitting on it waiting to sell it to somebody else. Distribution of this, as you can see, the more blue and the darker it is, the more cards that were stolen. Over 80% of them came to the United States alone. So unfortunately, we are the primary target for the attackers out there. All right, ransomware. I'm sure you're all familiar with ransomware. You've heard it certainly. The issue with ransomware these days isn't necessarily ransomware. I mean, it is an issue, don't get me wrong, but it's the data exfiltration portion of this that's happening. So they're going in, they're attacking your machines, and they're taking proprietary information, intellectual property, copyrighted data, things that you do not want publicly exposed. And then they're ransoming that off. You may remember the University of Utah had a ransomware attack recently, and they did everything correct. They had the proper backups. They responded correctly. I could not fault them in any way whatsoever, but they ended up paying the ransom anyway. And the reason they did was because the attackers were able to prove that they had student data, private student data they did not want released to the public. So they paid the ransom so that information would not get out there. In fact, there's a type of ransomware out there called Black Cat. So these folks, when they don't get paid, they get a little antsy about that, right? They want to get paid. It's how they make their money. So they start selling this information out there for other attackers to buy. If you do not pay them during the ransom, they're going to post it up on the dark web. The other bad guys, other malicious actors out there can then purchase this information from them. Well, they decided to take this to another layer. When this financial company didn't pay them, they spun up a website that looked just like theirs. Only instead of the headers being what it was, they started posting all this public information, or all this information publicly. All this private information was posted publicly. Audits, tax returns, driver's licenses, passports. You could click on this website, drill down. In fact, here's a section of the audits page. That includes birthdays, clients, estimated tax payments. This is information you certainly do not want out there for the public to see. This was available on a website. That's how they try to get these folks to pay. So they're pressuring people to pay the ransom, even if you recover from the ransomware product itself. And ransomware is a big money game, unfortunately. Something like $20 billion in estimated cost in 2021. That was not even last year, that was the year before. The average ransom in 2020 was $154,000, and it's going up every year since then. And the real killer for most companies is that they are down for up to 21 days on average. So even if you can recover properly from the ransomware, downtime of 3 weeks plus can really impact any organization, right? Most companies may not be able to survive being down that long. One thing I want you to note is that 70% of those attacks included some kind of phishing information. They were able to email, get some information from people, and leverage it that way. One thing we see is that if you, I don't want to get too technical, but if you spin up a remote desktop port, so if you open up your firewall to the internet, within 90 seconds, someone's already attacking it to see if it's penetrable. We see this in the cloud space. We spin up a cloud server. If we do not secure it immediately, there are already attacks going on to it. It's that fast going on out there. We're plugged into the whole world. There's a whole world, unfortunately, out there trying to steal your data. And unfortunately, we are the targets. Not just we, all of us. All right, go. Turn that off. Nowadays, attackers are also using legitimate sites in order to get around some of the scanners we have in place. So we may have all these great protection tools in place that are looking for sites we do not want people to go to, but they're using legitimate sites. Let me show an example of this. So here is a message that says it came from SharePoint and it's a received fax. And if we look at the domain, it's adobe.com. So a trusted domain. We would tend to let that through, right? We're not going to block anything from adobe.com. Now, if you click on go to document, it takes you to an actual, you can do an actual SharePoint document. You've received a file. Here's a snapshot of the file. It's a Microsoft.com site. Unfortunately, this click here to print or preview the document is not a valid link. It's an invalid link. This takes you to a site that looks like this. It says, hey, you went to SharePoint, enter your email address and password so I can collect that information. You have to log in. Now you just came from Microsoft's site, so chances are you're going to trust this. Unfortunately, the URL has nothing to do with Microsoft, yet it says OneDrive on it. So the attackers, the bad actors we call them, are out there leveraging good, real sites in order to launch attacks against you. Malware ads on Google is another thing. So we're going to see this a lot. These bad actors are paying to have ads posted to legitimate software that you may need to go to. Here's an example. I don't know if anyone's familiar with OBS software. It's a streaming software gamers use, podcasters use. Here's an example. Someone typed in OBS and the very first link was an ad for obstreaming.site. That is not the link to OBS streaming. That is a link to some malware which will infect your computer. In fact, the real link looks like this. I did in my own search, found it. It's obsproject.com. That's the real link. So they're actually paying for ads to be spun up to give you a link to go so you can grab malware. So just be aware that that ads cannot be trusted anymore, unfortunately, through Google's search engine. And I suspect others are going to see more of this. Here's another example. Notepad++. Anyone's familiar with this? It's like a hyped up version of Notepad. Many of us use. You type in Notepad++, you get all these different search results. None of them actually, this might be the real one. That one's not. Here's one that you might click on, although it says no paid, so if you're paying attention, you hopefully catch that. But this is, again, a malware site, a ransomware site that it's taking you to. And it's a sponsored ad someone paid for. There's just too many ads, and Google's having a hard time tracking all these. Back in the day, attackers were using Word and Excel to get to us, right? There'd be a macro inside of there. So you'd open up the attachment in your email, it's a Word document, it would fire off a macro that ran some malicious software. Well, Office or Microsoft decided to block all those macros from running automatically. So once that stopped, they switched to using OneNote, for those who are familiar with that. And it looks often like something like this, where it's a DHL shipment, you've got your invoice and your packing list or whatever, it looks like a OneNote document, it's a .1 file. You click on that, you open it up. Here's kind of an image in the background of what the actual files are, but it has this big button over the top of it. It says double click to view. So you double click on that, it actually runs this script, which then takes you to a site which downloads malware. Now, Microsoft's good about this. They will prompt you and say, hey, this is malicious software. This could potentially be malicious software. Unfortunately, most people see these prompts and just go, whatever, and click OK. So pay attention to these prompts. They might mean something that might save you from getting stuff you do not want out there. This actually happened in Executech recently. Employment offer scams are a real deal. So someone spun up on LinkedIn, they put up an Executech fake site, and they did a job offer to people. And when those people attended an interview, they felt like it was legitimate, right? Now this company has legitimacy. We had an interview together. Then they sent them an offer letter. Guess what was contained inside the offer letter? The malware. But they'd gone through this whole process. And the only way we knew was because some of these applicants started reaching out to us going, hey, what's going on? How come I didn't get the job? When do I start? Things like this. We started asking these questions. And we looked and we found that this was the real offer letter. Gary got a copy of. This is from an actual interviewee out there. So beware that they are spinning up fake versions of you and offering people jobs out there. That's how they're luring people in. Yeah, I know, fun, huh? All right, MFA fatigue attacks. So hopefully all of you are using multi-factor authentication. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but you certainly should be if you're not. A fatigue attack is when on my phone I get this prompt that says, do you want to log in? I have to hit the yes button. And it just starts going bling, 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 over and over and over. So this happened at Uber. This is how Uber got penetrated. A developer of theirs, they got a hold of their credentials somehow, who knows, went to the wrong site. Maybe they pulled up a OneNote. Someone got their credentials, they tried to log in, and it prompted the developer for their multi-factor authentication on their phone. And they did not hit yes, they were good about it. So the attackers continued to attempt to log in over and over and over and over. For an hour, this poor developer had just this ding, 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 ding going on his phone, his or her phone. Again, did not click the button. So the attackers tried a different route. They used WhatsApp to reach out to the employee and say, hey, this is your IT department. If you want this to stop, you're gonna have to click approve. So the developer said, okay, and approve. And that's how Uber got reached. So be aware, if you see a whole bunch of these things happening on your phone or going crazy like that, please don't hit the button. Never say yes to that. Go in and change your password instead. I used to trade cryptocurrency. I woke up one morning to this wall of messages on my phone saying, do you approve this login? And the only thing that stopped those attackers from grabbing all my crypto was multi-factor authentication. So please, please turn on multi-factor authentication on all your important accounts. If you're dealing with someone, there's an account you have or a service provider you have who does not offer multi-factor authentication, I would suggest you consider switching to another one, or at least reach out to them and say, this is not acceptable in this day and age. We've got to have some other layer. It's too easy for us. It happened to me, right? I do this for a living. So none of us are immune from losing our credentials. Let's make sure we're protecting ourselves with one more layer to keep the bad guys out. All right, this was a scary one. This was the Hatch Bank got breached, and it affected some 140,000 people. It was from a third party. It wasn't even the bank itself. It was what we call a zero-day vulnerability, meaning it happened before anyone knew there was an update or a patch for it. And unfortunately, the really scary part is it was called Fortra. And if anyone's familiar with Fortra, this is the bank's security software. The security software itself had a vulnerability that the attackers leveraged to get in, which means the bank could not have done anything about this. It was their security software that they used to protect themselves that got breached. So because of that, we want to talk about some prevention. There's some basics. Everybody should be running antivirus protection. I think that's pretty standard nowadays. Even at home, please, because a lot of times our home computers are tied, or our home accounts are tied to our work accounts, or email password resets become that way. I would encourage you to buy some good antivirus software. There's some great free products out there, but I'm going to say this is one of those layers that you want to get the best you can. So pay for antivirus software, both at home and at work, please. And I really encourage people to download some kind of an anti-ransomware product. Put it on all the critical machines in your environment. Put it on the financial people's computers. Put it on your file servers, the executives. Those people should be running some kind of anti-ransomware product, because it's typically their files that can be stolen and used against you, right? So if the ransom gets stopped, if they're able to exfiltrate that data, they can do what we saw earlier, leverage that against you. So I'm not here to spout any particular product. It's hard to say apparently, but I really want to encourage everyone to grab some kind of anti-ransomware product, please. Right, can you see? All right, have some kind of a web filtering, please. Because we're going to make mistakes. We're humans, we make mistakes, we click on things we shouldn't. If we have some kind of a web filtering involved, it may catch that before we get too far down the road. So the idea is there's companies out there whose job it is to find all the bad stuff on the internet, collect all those sites, and put them in a block list for us. We run this web filtering software, and it automatically alerts us if we go somewhere that we should not on accident. I've had this plenty of times where someone sends me an email, I click on something, I get one of these. Thank you for stopping me from going to that site I should not have gone to. So please, encourage you to have website filtering of some kind. All right, we'll talk about passwords. This is the best practice for passwords. So it used to be we had to rotate our passwords every 90 days, and we had complexity turned on. 3 out of 4, right? Capital, small, punctuation, number. So that's still the case out there. We see this a lot. However, just know that that's changing. We had a white hat hacker come in and do a demonstration for us at Executech, and this white hat attacker, spun up a server in the cloud with 64 processors. It was just this ridiculously, behemoth server out there. Then did a brute force attack on a password list to show us by example. 5 characters or less, you just blinked and it had the answer. 6 characters, took a few seconds. 7 characters, it would take a few minutes. At 8, it's going to take a few hours, and so on. So it's really become about the length of the password we want to make sure we're doing. And complexity we're turning off because it's kind of hard to remember J &3, exclamation mark, that kind of stuff. People tend to write them down. For those who've worked in tech, we find these little Post-it notes attached to people's monitors, or if they're really sneaky, they put them underneath the keyboard. So terrible practice, obviously. We don't want to do that anymore. Instead, we want to encourage you to use a passphrase. Let's go to the park on Friday. Nice and long, easy to remember. And we turn off rotation because when we force people to rotate passwords, they tend to use a pattern. We'll put a 1 first, change it to a 2. The attackers know this. They're going to look and see, I got a hold of 2 passwords. I know what's next. So we want to turn off rotation and know this is coming. We work with a venture capitalist firm. They got approval from FINRA or from the SEC to turn off this password rotation to make it 14-character minimum and use passphrases. So this is coming. There's still a lot of sites out there who are using the old school, but no, this is changing. For multi-factor authentication, as I mentioned, how important that is, please use, whenever possible, an authenticator app. So Microsoft makes one, Google makes one, there's one called Authy out there. Our phones, unfortunately, can be stolen, right? And if someone steals my phone, they probably have access to my multi-factor authentication. Phones can be what's called a SIM card theft, where I call up the phone company, I pretend to be you, I have enough information about you, I convince the phone company to send me a new SIM card. I lost my phone, can you please send me a new SIM card? Phone company sends them a SIM card, they plug it into their phone, your phone stops working, their phone starts working as you, now they're getting all your MFA codes. So authenticator apps get around that issue. If you really want to take it to the next level, and I will encourage you to do these prompts where you have to go into your authenticator and it does a push, we call it a push notification, and it prompts you for a 2-digit code. This is what we do at Executech. We're happy to help you folks set it up or have your IT group set it up. Or it's prompting you for a code. This prevents that MFA bombing attack we saw earlier, MFA fatigue. Okay, still with me? I know I'm talking fast. I had a lot of coffee this morning, sorry. And by all means, if you guys have questions, feel free to stop me. We'll have a Q&A opportunity at the end, but if you have questions along the way, please let me know. All right, I recommend a password manager. Whenever possible, it's tough to remember all of our passwords, and we want to use a unique one for every site we go to. We really don't want to reuse the same password whenever possible. If we're reusing passwords and someone gets a hold of that password, now they have access to all the sites we've been to rather than just one. So please use a password manager. There's some free ones out there. They don't sync necessarily between devices, but there's one called KeePass, K-E-E-P-A-S-S, that I recommend for home use. If you want a free product, like I said, it doesn't do the syncing across devices, but whatever you use, just please use some kind of a password manager. And please, it's one key to get all access to all the keys. So make sure you're creating a nice long password. That's tough to get into for that one. Please put a layer of email security in place of some kind. Not only are you blocking phishing messages, spam messages alone make it worthwhile, right? If your busy employee gets 40 less messages that day, they'd have to look through that are fake. You've saved a lot of time and efficiency for them, and it makes up for it. On top of that, we're blocking phishing messages. Someone's trying to get their credentials, and malware. We see a lot of malware being sent over email. We see a lot of these attachments, OneNote attachments, HTML attachments. So email is becoming a really common attack vector. Something like 70% of the attacks we saw on the earlier slide are happening through email. We're gathering people's information that way, and they're going after the busy humans. We put a lot of these great layers of security in place, hardware and software products, but unfortunately, humans, we're subject to making error, right? Human error is a real thing. So let's make sure we're protecting the humans as much as possible, giving them less work to do and checking on that kind of stuff. And I really want to encourage you to do some kind of a security awareness training. So this is where I or someone else does a phishing campaign against your employees or against your staff. The idea is that I get a lot of pushback from companies saying that's very big brother-esque. I don't want someone phishing my employees. But the truth is, you'd probably rather have someone who can come back and tell you a report on it than have the bad guys do it and be successful about it. So I really, really want to encourage you folks to please do a phishing campaign. Again, we're trying to educate people. It's not an attempt to catch the person who's doing something wrong. It's an attempt to educate and train people about what to look for, how to pay attention to those things. And we see this big uptick. We do a phishing campaign in an organization, and suddenly we get this bombardment from all the staff saying, is this a legitimate email? Is this a real email? Is this a real email? And we see a big spike in that right afterward. Now, over time, that tends to decrease, right? They get kind of comfortable. They stop asking questions. So at least semi-annually or quarterly, I recommend you have these phishing campaigns done. It kind of keeps people on their toes, and we want some, I don't know, I call it a healthy level of paranoia. We want to make sure that we're looking for that stuff. We're checking URLs. We're making sure that what we're looking at is real. And this really does keep people on their toes. We do this internally as well here. It's a good way to keep that, to keep you, I guess on your toes is the best way to put it. To make sure you're checking links. You're not just clicking on things, you're paying attention. And if you're not sure, you're sending it off to a security or an IT department asking them, is this real? In fact, the FBI recommends that, confirming destinations, the URLs are correct, right? We all can put our mouse over the cursor or put our mouse over the link to see where it actually goes, because what it says in the message is not necessarily where it goes. And we want to educate users about where to download programs. So in your organization, if there are tools that people need to do their job, rather than having them go on Google, type in a search, and maybe they click on that sponsored site that's not legitimate, give people a list of where they can get real versions. They need a copy of Notepad++. Hey guys, here's a link where you can click on, whether it's in your intranet site or maybe an onboarding document you use, where people can go to get the software that they need to do their job. One other FBI warning I saw was use an ad blocker. Because those ads nowadays are not legitimate, we probably should load an ad blocking software of some kind on our browsers. It's interesting, I thought the FBI is actually suggesting we use ad blockers. I thought that was great. And then whenever possible, I recommend this as well. In your email, if you get an email that says, hey, your flight is delayed, or hey, your package is delayed, or you owe Amazon money, whatever it is, rather than going in the browser's search bar and typing Amazon or typing FedEx, go to the address bar itself and type in FedEx.com or Amazon.com. If my plane's delayed, I don't type in Delta in the search and hope I click on the right one. I type in Delta.com and I go right to that site. So, make sure you're typing in the actual URL. All right. Oh, I forgot dang it. I was going to bring one as an example. So we call these FIDO2 devices. These are physical touch keys. And I have a couple of them. The idea is that it's a USB port. I plug in the USB port, and it requires a touch on the device. It's not a fingerprint reader, just a touch. So anyone trying to connect remotely to my device cannot get in because they're not able to reach over and touch that little thing. They make a USB-C one, which is super low profile, barely sticks out of the laptop. It has a little tiny brass tab on the top you just touch. No fingerprint required. It's a great level of multi-factor authentication. It requires a physical contact with the machine in order to get logged in. I would look at deploying these in your environment if that's an option. Okay, let's talk about, let's see, we're going to talk, I got 15 minutes. Actually, I'm going to skip this one. About time here. Cover social media. For social media, just real quickly, please check your social media accounts. I was a content provider for a while, so I'm not a great example of this, but whenever possible, set your accounts to private. Another thing you also want to check is, keep your accounts private. Try not to share work-related information. It's tough to do on LinkedIn because we're all talking about our jobs and our positions. Be careful about your contact information. We had a bunch of people here at Executech who reached out to me and said, hey, I'm getting these messages, supposedly from the CEO, asking me to buy some gift cards. I looked at LinkedIn, and their phone number was available on LinkedIn. By default, I think LinkedIn sends is that your contact information is available by default. So go to LinkedIn and check. Make sure any numbers or contact information you do not want the world to see is off. And there's different settings. There's like it's visible to the people I'm connected with. But unless you're checking every single person you're connected with, I recommend just turning it off unless you want people to reach out to you. I get all these spam messages now because my information was out there for a while. And then Google yourself. What does it look like when you go Google yourself? I usually do an example. We're short on time where I put my own name in, see what comes up. Maybe there's information out there you don't want people to know, and you can go in and talk to that site and say, hey, I want that taken down, or you can make some changes in order for that not to show up on Google. So this is what the attackers are doing. They're profiling you. They're going to do a Google search for you. So find out ahead of time what's out there. Cloud storage sharing. So Box.com, Google Drive, OneDrive, whatever it is, we often share these documents with people outside of our organization. By default, typically those things are set to two things. One is it's set to never expire, meaning it's out there forever. As long as that link is available, someone has access to that file. And number two, it's probably set to edit rights. People have the ability to go in and modify those files. Now you may be sharing it with someone, a colleague in a different organization that you work with, and that's fine. But what if their computer gets breached and someone gets a hold of that link? Do you want someone else getting the information? So set an expiration. You know, it needs to be 90 days, fine, but don't make it automatically set to default of infinity. And set the permission to view only. There's no reason people should have edit rights in your document unless you're collaborating with them. And then what I do is I create a folder called shared externally. And every file I share externally, I drop in that folder. So periodically I can go in and look at that folder and see what's out there and delete the files that no longer need to be shared with people. So we talked about a lot of different prevention mechanisms. So how do we prioritize this? What's most important? We see a lot of organizations that do this thing that's maybe easiest or the least expensive, or in some cases, what's most in their face. But there's a better way to prioritize that, and that is through risk. What is the riskiest thing? And let's make sure we're putting our efforts and our money based on that risk. And we do that through what we call a risk register. We're going to create a matrix showing the things we're worried about, and we're going to step through it here in just a minute because I think I have time for that. Yeah. What we're most worried about, and then we can sort by that and start addressing those needs. So here's an example. This is a snapshot I took of the internal Executech risk register. It is not information I'm worried about getting out there. That's why I left it on here. But this is an example, right? So we have an impact rating. What would happen? What would be the impact if this event happened? What's the likelihood of that happening? And then based on that, we're going to score a risk factor to that in order for us to be able to prioritize what we're going to do. In fact, let's step through one real quick. I'll show you what that looks like. All right, this is audience participation. Name something you're concerned about that may happen to your organization that would create downtime.
Stolen credit card data.
Stolen credit cards. That is a big deal. If that happened, what would be the impact? Would it be negligible? Would it be minor, moderate, major, or catastrophic, do you think?
Major.
Major, okay. What's the likelihood of that happening?
I guess it depends on your security.
Well, in your organization, what's the likelihood, would you say?
Don't know, I'm 3 weeks in, but I'll tell
Okay.
you.
So let's put it in average. All right. Give me another one, please. Somebody else. Yeah, John.
I'm always worried about employee data. You know, working in accounting, I'll get emailed with like payroll information, and I'm like,
Why you
can't
this?
do that.
Right.
We gotta like tell me where the file is, and I'll go find it.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned the security on the files. I don't know what our share file settings are. So that's one thing.
Okay, so employee data getting exposed. Okay, what would you say the impact of that would be if it were to happen?
Probably major.
Okay, and what is the likelihood of that happening?
Let's put it.
At average, all right. So now we have two highs. All right, one more. Let's do one more just for fun. Anybody else? And it could be something simple. It could be like, I'm worried about the power going out or loss of internet. These things also impact our organization. Anybody? Maybe we'll come
I
up
had
with
one that happened.
Please. Yeah, tell me. So downtime due to an attack, sure. And what was the impact for you folks when that happened?
It wasn't
Wasn't too
It
impactful?
wasn't terrible, so it actually was moderate. I think as an employee, it felt crappy.
Right, I can do my job or go to work, right.
But, yeah, we're trying to do things. We were inefficient, I would say.
Yeah,
That was probably.
okay,
But as far as revenue, if you think of it that way.
Right.
To a third per week.
yeah. Yeah, and honestly, we justify a lot of these security costs by looking at that, like what would downtime cost you for 3 days or 21 days in average around?
Yeah, in that case, it was 6 days of off season. It was
During the business, right, would have been bad news. Sure. So I'm gonna say it's almost certain, because in your case, it did happen, so. So you begin to see, so we score this, we're gonna get an incident response impact rating rather from 1 to 5. We get a likelihood rating from 1 to 5. We multiply those two numbers to come up with the risk value. And based on that, then we have a number we can, like here's a 25, right? If we're both highest possible, give it a 25. Now we can sort by and we can decide what we're gonna do next based on those ratings. And I encourage you to put everything in here, everything you can think of. Things you may not consider, right? I mean, I don't know, zombie attacks, whatever it is for you. Pandemics, that's a real thing. I would never have put it in a risk register before, but it's in there now, I assure you. Attacks, outages, long-term power outages, long-term internet outages. What do we do in those events? Yeah. Theft, yes. Physical theft, right. Yep, stolen laptops, yeah. We had one environment where over the weekend, someone came in and stole all the workstations, stole the server, and stole the safe too. They didn't try to open it, they just took the whole safe with them. That's where all their backups were stored. They lost all their company data, all their customer data. That place was no longer in business because they had nothing to go on anymore. So physical theft is a real issue. And the likelihood, unfortunately, of someone having a laptop stolen is pretty high, right? So, and the impact might be minimal at first, but it depends on what's on that laptop. It could be worse. So the idea is create, work on this, create a risk value, and then put a strategy together how you're going to deal with each of these so that you're prioritizing your efforts and your money based on what's most likely to happen. And, you're not going to get to everything necessarily, but you're going to work down that list and at least attack the things that are most important. All right. Let's talk about some planning in our last few minutes here. So it's great that we all have the mindset of let's block the attackers from getting into our systems, but I want to change that mindset, and not to get rid of that one, but to instead, let's add the mindset of what do we do when that happens? Because unfortunately, the likelihood is pretty high. Ransomware is skyrocketing everywhere we've seen it. Attacks are happening all over the place. So what do we do in the event that occurs? And number one, I want you to create an incident response plan in your organizations or work with your team to do so. This is just a plan of what are we going to do if and when this happens. Get all the heads of department, all the department heads involved, IT team, security team, executives, whatever it may be in your organization, get them together and practice it. Hey, let's practice what happens if we lose the internet for, if the internet goes out for a while. What do we do if we get a breach, right? If someone attacks us, we get ransomware, how are we going to respond to this? The idea is we want to narrow down that time from the time, the attack happens until you're doing something about it. And you do not want to be scrambling, trying to figure all this out after the attack has started on you. So practice it. We'll talk about a little more about this, but create the relationships you need ahead of time. Is it legal team? I'll give you a list here in just a minute, but have those folks ready to go. You do not want to start looking up who's the good cyber lawyer to reach out to. What's my insurance company's contact number? Maybe whoever has their contact is on vacation when that happens. So be prepared ahead of time with some of that information. And then train all of your staff on what to do if they suspect they're being breached. So everybody should know, hey, if Derek, if you suspect there's an attack going on, what do you do? Most people are like, I guess I call my boss. Have everyone trained on what to do, right? Call the IT person, call the CEO, call the security team, whatever it may be in your organization. Train all of your staff on what to do when they suspect a breach so we can close that gap from the time someone suspects something until someone can do something about it. So just some of the context you may need. You're going to need legal counsel. Unfortunately, this day and age, you're going to need, who's your cyber insurance contact? We talked about that. Perhaps you're going to need a forensic investigator, someone who can look into this and figure out what's actually going on. You need to involve the FBI or other law enforcement. Public relations, if this starts impacting customers, who's going to talk to those customers? Service providers, business partners, and of course, any impacted customers. Have those lists prepared ahead of time. Create those relationships ahead of time so you're not scrambling when the proverbial stuff hits the fan. Then here's kind of an idea of the team involved, right? You want to create all these roles and responsibilities ahead of time. Who needs to be notified internally? Who's going to manage internal communications? Who's going to manage external communications? Who's going to oversee technical operations? Again, we do not want to be scrambling to figure out who's going to do these things when we're under attack. All right, last slide. I'll let you guys go a little early. So there are really 9 different facets of an incident response that I want you to consider. Number 1, identify, right? We're going to identify the problem. Where is it occurring? Who's it happening to? What's the severity of it? Maybe it's something minor. Maybe it's a laptop that got stolen. That's a big deal. Maybe it's an IT provider who's down for a week. That's a big deal. Number 2, we want to contain the threat. We want to make sure its impact is limited, whenever possible. We encourage people to go unplug network cables. If a machine is infected, unplug that network cables. You can't go to other machines if possible. We want to preserve evidence. We want to give the FBI and the law enforcement the best chance they have of going after those people. In order to do that, we want to preserve evidence whenever possible. It's kind of a technical thing, but we want to try to save that data. Internal communication. Who are you going to talk to internally? What are the stakeholders that are involved? Analyze to figure out the root cause. Where did it come from? How did it get here? How do we effectively eradicate it? Then start the eradication process. Let's get rid of this thing. Let's eliminate it from our systems. We want to communicate externally, right? Do we need to report this? Do we need to send out something to our customers that were impacted perhaps, or our business partners? Then we want to recover systems and data back to a stable, secure state. And lastly, we want to follow up afterward to say, what did we learn from this? What are we going to do different? How are we going to adjust our plan based on what we learned from this experience? All right. Those are the 9 steps to an incident response plan. And that is all I have for today. Any questions? Yes, please.
Just curious. My understanding is that social engineering is pretty prevalent.
Yeah.
And from a business standpoint, I think you've kind of laid out several answers. I mean, there isn't just one answer that
Right.
solves this problem.
I wish there
It's
were.
a multi, I know, right? Like one password, right?
Do your job.
Yeah. What do you see as, I guess, the most effective strategy of combating social engineering when it comes to, I mean, like if you have customers that, like I worked for a company that they had financial accounts and they had a customer service team. So
Sure.
social engineering was huge. They would call in and they
And
would just get
somebody.
one little piece of information,
Yep,
and then
call
that
somebody
person,
else. And,
yeah, and then they call somebody else,
Yeah.
and then they get a different piece of information.
right.
And is it just education? Obviously, that's a part of it, but are there newer strategies around combating that? Because it seems like that one's really tough.
That is really tough. We can't just throw on a firewall or do something that prevent that from happening, right? So unfortunately, the best is education. We want to educate people. I had a slide in a different time for this one, but a social engineering slide, which says, when someone fills out one of those Facebook quizzes, it says, what was your first concert? Or, what was your first pet's name? And they keep asking these questions. Someone's collecting that information. Someone's gathering that because they're going to do a profile on you. Maybe it's one of your password reset questions, right? What was the first concert I attended? So I've got a cousin, love her to death, but every day she's posting hey, Facebook told me I'm this. Facebook, she's doing these quizzes out there. What she does not realize is that she's creating a huge profile out there for attackers to see. So we really want to educate people on being aware of releasing information that can be leveraged against them. And unfortunately, education is the best tool out there.
Follow up to that is, how do you protect your parents?
Well, that's a whole different program. Yeah, that's a whole conversation. That's a great question. I'll cover that real quick. I've got a few minutes left. So security is about layers. We saw today, right? We want to put all these different layers in place because chances are one or more may get penetrated, but if we can put a bunch of them in place, we can stop it from happening. So with your parents, it's going to be the same kind of thing. You're going to go make sure your parents have antivirus software in place. Hopefully you're going to educate them on not to buy gift cards. I had some in my family. I'm not going to name the person's position in the family, but she called me up and she was just distraught. And she said, Amazon told me I owed them money and they got me to go buy gift cards. And I was about to give them the gift cards when something kind of just told me I shouldn't be doing this. So she got all the way she actually bought the gift card, right?
My dad.
Yeah, exactly. So I had another friend who called me up, older gentleman, and said, Microsoft told me I needed to reach out to them because there was an error on my computer. It wasn't Microsoft. Microsoft is never going to prompt you to get on there. And he did a remote control session on the computer. You could see the guy going in, grabbing all these files, and the red flag went up right then, and he unplugged the thing, fortunately, and called me. So I was able to stop them. But I would say one of the things that I think we fail to do most often is trust our instincts. Too often, after an attack has happened, you start interviewing people, someone says, something felt off. It didn't feel right to me, right? We hear a lot of that stuff. So I want to encourage everyone to trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Maybe your conscious mind isn't aware of something. There's some part of you, some smarter part of us perhaps, or something more aware that says something is not right here. So pay attention to that and teach your parents to do that if possible. But put an antivirus, created some long passwords. My mom's password gets hacked, her email password periodically. I get an email 2 a.m. from her. I know it's not her because she's asleep. Like, no, my mom did not send me an email at 2 a.m. But attempt to raise their awareness, limit what they have access to whenever possible. Like in my parents' machine, they're not administrators. They can't just go install anything they want to. So maybe it's not a nice solution, but I'm technical enough and I've got remote control. They can call me anytime and say, hey, this isn't working. Can you help me? I'll jump on and really encourage them to get past the embarrassment phase. The reason that family member didn't reach out until the last minute was that she was embarrassed to let me know that she had a problem or that she'd followed she'd followed the pressure that she got. So encourage them to get past that embarrassment. This goes for all of us. We want to make sure if we make a mistake, if I click on something I shouldn't have, I'm gonna go own it, right? I'm gonna reach out to the security team and say, look, I followed this link, I fell for it, I was a dummy, it shouldn't have happened. I did it anyway because I'm human, I make mistakes. So be willing to admit when you admit fault, right? When we do something wrong, because it's better to do it early on and catch it than it is to find out a month from now that an attacker's been in the system the whole time and now we're really in trouble. So no great answers. But yeah.
Oh, my parents.
Unfortunately, the elderly are targets, and the bad guys know this. Yeah, please. Yeah,
Is
Kevin.
there a certain demographic that hackers target? Do they, I mean, is just everybody, is it small businesses, is it big businesses? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, unfortunately, now there are certain groups out there, nation states are going after like the Kaseya's of the world, this kind of thing. But in general, nowadays we're seeing what we call spray and pray. They're just bombarding everyone with something to see who bites. Unfortunately, the demographic most often hit are the elderly, right? Their accounts get hacked. They are more prone to believing attackers out there. They're not used to this kind of thing. Across the spectrum, I would say that small and medium businesses typically get hit, not because they are the targets, but because they tend to have fewer security levels in place. So unfortunately, it's everyone. I've never seen anyone who's exempt from it. I had the unpleasant job of getting on one of the ransomware attackers' dark web sites and seeing what they were selling out there. And it was gas stations. It was charities, schools, hospitals. No one is safe this day and age. They're going after everyone. There's no, they have no qualms about it. They have no moral restrictions. It's probably because they're getting paid a lot, or maybe their family's being held hostage. I don't know, whatever's going on. But no, there is no demographic that I can see. Yeah, Lee.
Question for you. I hear a lot of company employees are using their company email addresses on non-company email sites, or on their Facebook or their social.
Yeah.
Bad news.
Yeah, in general, you don't want to use anything. You keep your personal life and your work life separate whenever possible. All of your organizations should have an internet use policy in place. This is one of those legal things we want to have in place that tells people what they can and cannot do on the internet based on work. If you're using your work profile, then here's what you cannot do. You cannot go post hate sites. You can't jump on gun sites, whatever it may be for your organization. But yeah, you do not want to have employees go sign up for their work account and start posting things, because that's a reflection on your company, right? Some of that PR could come back to you. So yeah, whenever possible, keep those lives separate.
I have a question for the Brown and Brown guys. Quickly, talk about cyber security insurance, cyber insurance, and when, at what point in your company life cycle, it's one of those, it's not a nice to have necessarily, but it's expensive. So kind of talk where in your life growth cycle does that make sense?
I mean, pretty much now in this day and age, it makes sense for every company of every size. One of the best examples that I give, DJ's heard me talk about this one, is we had a client who was a bar/restaurant in Park City. So, bar restaurant would be
Right.
This had to do with physical theft, but it also came into play later. Someone ran in, stole their POS system in the front, ripped it right off the cord.
Wow.
And this actually, no, this is the correction. This bar and restaurant did not have cyber insurance. We had their other lines of coverage for certain things, and they would not buy cyber because it was expensive. Come to find out, they were a vendor of either Visa or American Express, one of the two major ones. That vendor dropped them as they weren't covered, and within a matter of half a year, mainly because of that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just, that's a small thing, but that's just the bar, amplify that to 10 with a large size company.
Yep.
So, it's expensive, but it can be expensive up front and the set amount, or it can be expensive in the end. That's the way we look at it.
Yeah, it's a great point. We've got organizations and we encourage everyone to have cyber insurance this day and age. If you get a ransom for, $1 million or $500,000, can you cough up that cash all of a sudden? Probably not. The only way to survive that is through cyber insurance. Good question.
You were talking about separating your personal and work life.
Yeah.
When it comes to our cell phones, oftentimes those are the ones that are intermixed the most.
Yep.
I don't think anybody here would be a fan of carrying around two phones, but maybe that answers my question.
So
That was a perfect segment.
thanks for that, Dave. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, whenever possible, we do want to separate them. In some instances, such as a cell phone, it may not make sense, right? I don't want to carry around two phones. That's a pain in the butt. I don't want to have two numbers, try to answer both at the same time. There are things that we can do as a security team to keep your phone locked down. So we say, hey, if you're going to have to use your personal phone for work, they're going to make you jump through certain hoops to do it. It's going to require you to have a screen lock on there. It's going to require you to run some kind of antivirus software on there. So, in our organization, we're going to say, if you're going to use your personal phone, if you're to access work data, there are certain minimums you have to hit. These things have to be in place. So you can, like if you don't access work through your phone, you don't want to carry around two phones, fine. Here's what you need to do for us.
You might want to mention Intune, how Intune can
Yeah, and so for the work phones, at least, we do a full connection to what we call Intune. It's a Microsoft product. It allows for remote deployment of laptops and phones out there that give us the ability to remotely wipe something if it's stolen. So someone calls up and say, hey, or I guess they wouldn't call us, they would message us, but my phone got stolen. We can jump in and remotely wipe the phone. And we can set up the laptop next time it jumps online, remotely wipe it out as well. Excuse me.
I don't have a second phone at Executech, but for example, if I'm in Teams or an Outlook, I can't take screenshots. Got to do a password thumbprint every time I get into Outlook or Teams because of the stuff that security teams install. And it is a little bit of a pain. People say,
Yeah.
But a little bit.
Yeah, we get pushback. There's no doubt. We get pushback saying, this is a pain in the butt. Why are you making me do this? But, should a breach happen, then we can't say we tried our best. So yeah, there's another question back there.
Yeah, I like that the cyber insurance thing. A lot of the stuff is now requirements.
It
We've
is.
seen
Yeah.
cyber insurance requirements
Get worse. Yeah.
So is everything you covered today wired in cyber insurance? Nice to have still.
I would defer to this guy, but my answer is it's going to very depend on the insurer. But we are seeing a large. So when cyber insurance first came out, they started losing a lot of money, actually, from my experience, because people were paying these ransoms. They're like, oh, I got cyber insurance. I'm just going to pay the ransom. And they weren't doing things to protect themselves as much. So cyber insurance said, all right, you got to start jumping through these hoops. You got to start putting these layers of security in place in order for us to actually insure you. So, and we are seeing, number one, the cost go up of cyber insurance, and number two, the requirements start to skyrocket of what they need to do in order to be properly insured. Anything you want to touch
No,
on?
that's you hit the number right on the head. The majority of what you covered, fiber-wise, does exist when certain carriers are trying to insure these people. And yeah, cost of it has gone up, but cost of everything has risen within the last year, let alone the last 3 years.
Right.
And cyber insurance being one of those, because we are now in an extremely digital era where the next pandemic is a cyber attack globally.
Yeah.
So like you said, a lot of the companies or a lot of the carriers are requiring more hoops to jump through, more cost to cover your attacks. But that is just because at the end of the day, it's either, again, you have a set premium up front, covering your bases, and if you don't meet our requirements, I'm talking as the carrier, not as the insurance guy. The carrier said, if you don't meet our requirements, we're not gonna protect you, even if you do insurance.
Yeah.
Plenty of exclusions.
Yeah.
But the majority of what you covered are required.
Yeah.
More informed.
Anybody else? Okay, one more. Yeah.
So the thumbprint.
Yeah.
Really a good mechanism? I don't like it.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's better than nothing, that's for sure. You know, it's pretty unique, right?
Yeah.
It's tough to duplicate. I mean, it's a guy for your thumb with it, but generally it's pretty tough to duplicate. So yeah, it's a good practice. It's very unique. It's unique to you. That's the key part.
Ads and I like have to hit the edges or a phrase. And
Right.
yeah.
So make it easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It actually made me think that with the prevalence of AI now becoming super popular
Yeah.
and facial recognition and face swapping and things like that, do you see like the I can open my phone with my face kind of a thing going away because you can hold up a picture and that kind of a thing versus a thumbprint, which is a lot more, well, I don't know. I mean, it depends on how accurate the face
Well,
recognition
sure.
is.
Right.
For how many points, it
Right.
measures, but
I think the facial recognition is going to start looking, and it already is, where it's looking more three-dimensional. So it's not just a flat version of you, it's a three-dimensional version of you. So how far back are your ears compared to your nose, for example, those are stats it's going to look at. So it's not just a picture of you, but an image of you that'd be tougher to capture. So yeah, it's a real issue. We see we talked about in one of our podcasts actually, where people are overlaying someone else's face on top of an interview, for instance. So unfortunately, AI is a real big deal.
Touch the screen.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're over time, so I'm going to stop here.
James, very much. This was awesome.